Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Very straightforward topic for you today. Let's do it. What made the creepiest person you've ever met creepy? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I worked with a middle aged guy, 49 at the time, in a production job. I was 27 and am a woman, so no idea if that played a role with this, but within the first week of me working there, he told me his life story on how he went to jail for 5 years because he sexually assaulted two 9-year-old girls after getting them drunk at a nearby hotel. I went to HR about it, and they just told him not to randomly tell people that because that's effing weird. I didn't speak to him after that unless absolutely necessary. I used to hitchhike back in the day. I was in South Texas, and some older lady picked me up and started talking about sex, and then told me about how he'd like to go to New Orleans and get a couple of little boys, and then went into some great detail. It was the only time I ever told someone to just pull over and let me out. I'd even slipped my knife out and had it concealed in my right hand just in case. He just pulled over and let me out. It took me a few minutes before I could walk back out on the highway to try for another ride. This was probably 1979. This guy my dad knew. Honestly, don't remember his first name because he was Mr. So-and-so to me, so I'll call him Jay. My dad bought, renovated, and sold classic cars as a hobby, and Jay was a local who also worked on cars. My dad is exceptionally gregarious and friends with everyone, so he would stop to his buddies' houses when he saw them out in their garages for a chat. One time we were on our way home from somewhere, and my dad sees Jay in his garage as we pass by, so he stops. I was roughly 11 years old, female. We get out, and I make eye contact with Jay. Instantly feel like I'm going to throw up. I had seen him in passing before, but had never interacted with him. My mom had said he was a weirdo, though. Anyway, he keeps staring at me while talking to my dad, and after a minute or two, I decide to just go sit in my dad's truck. My dad comes back, felt like hours because I didn't have a book, and this was in the late 80s, so no phone. And he says, Jay wants to know if you'll babysit for him sometime. He had a toddler daughter. I'm like, no, I will literally never do that, thanks. Anyway, years pass, I'm an adult, and get a call from my dad. Remember Jay? He was arrested for SA on a little girl, 7 years old if I recall correctly, and also one of his daughters when she was little. Assuming there was a lot more victims that the authorities didn't know about, my dad was astonished. My mom and I were not. Well, that guy's a human piece of garbage, so good instincts right there, and happy you made it out okay. Sorry for the victims. He had no friends, so to be nice one day, I invited him over after school to trade some cards. The second my dog met his doggo's body language shifted to tense and alert. Dog wouldn't let us be in the same room without sitting between us, straight stared him down the entire time, and it was some of the weirdest vibe. Never did that to anyone else. Creepiest dude I ever met, to be honest. While he was over, he openly told me he stole a girl's wallet so he could find it and ask her out. I didn't hang out with him anymore after that. He was a sex offender and general psychopath, never charged, but numerous girls in our periphery and university had awful experiences. He was in his 30s and preyed exclusively on 18 to 20-ish year olds. He liked to toy with their feelings. He didn't just assault people. He wormed his way into their lives for months first and did as much damage to their lives as possible after the fact. Very manipulative, very destructive. He was also a very violent man, nasty bar fights and such, although I only heard of him pushing one of the women I knew of. But the really creepy bit was his unnerving views on women. He called all women snakes, not in a jokey way. He was dead serious. As in all women, he thought that every woman on the planet was not just a lesser species, but one that posed a threat to him. He really truly thought his predatory behavior was justified. He simply did not see women as human beings. It was more unnerving than just regular hatred. It was something colder and more focused. He talked about them like prey. I'm 100% certain that I'll see him in the news for murdering at least one woman one day. It seems inevitable. Scariest person I've ever met by far. His general vibe was just off. He had completely lifeless shark eyes, didn't respect anyone's personal space, and stared at people all the time. He was well liked though, and when I'd bring it up that he creeped me out, people would say I was being a bitch and that he was a good dude. Well, people should have listened to me, because last I heard he's in prison for solicitation of middle school aged boys online and CP. He worked as a taxi driver in the 80s. He'd frequent a bar when a certain young lady was the bartender. One night, he offered her a ride home after her shift. He then killed, and cut up her body, then disposed of it in various dumpsters around the city. He was spending life in prison. I was a CO and had to work face to face with him on a daily basis. He was a creepy old F. When other, more seasoned officers gave me the advice not to look up the inmates' crimes, I didn't listen. It made my job really hard. I was 26-ish, working with an older guy, like mid or late 40s, and my beautiful female friend from college got hired as well. Now, I may be biased, but I thought she was an absolute knockout, smart, funny, creative, assertive, and just achingly beautiful. I had asked her out in college and got turned down. That's okay. It evolved into a wonderful friendship. Anyway, I'm giving you the backstory because that older guy I worked with, he was at least 20 plus years older, had a crazy crush on her, compared her to his daughter, who was the same age, asked me all about her, and wanted me to give him insight on wooing her. He eventually started making sexually suggestive comments to her, mentioning things like how he had a mirror on his ceiling so he could see himself making love, etc. My friend was rightfully repulsed by him, but not the kind of person to complain to HR or our boss. We constantly ridiculed him when he wasn't around, slagging off on his inappropriate jokes or attempts to hit on her. Our boss knew he was being weird to my friend, and when had to dominate or downsize the department, he was the only one cut, much to everyone's relief. Random guy walks into the restaurant I was working at before. He asked for crazy coworker. We didn't interact at all. If she was working or if I can give her schedule. I declined both because it was information he didn't need to know. Told another coworker at the time, and she told me the same guy would sit in a corner table and watch her work. At that point, I told her that he was banned and to let crazy coworker tell him he was banned and can't come back. I also informed the cooks and to have the cooks make sure she left safely. This only happened because he happened to give me a creepy chill down my spine when he walked in and asked the question. Coming from somebody who spent the better part of almost 2 decades working in some capacity in a bar or restaurant, there are customers like this all too often. Mostly it's aimed at female coworkers, but a couple of guys felt the wrath too. Not that I would know anything about that. 18-year-old on bath salts. He was a privileged kid who'd gotten high. I worked in a medical facility when the ER transferred inebriated but stable patients. People were sometimes confrontational or combative. Every so often, a few bad apples on the staff would push someone too far and get punched by a patient. But not me. Never had a problem, except this one kid. He was a normie, high out of his mind during the bath salt craze. He was brought in, looked right AR to me, no one else, and would not stop. Watched me with this creepy, too big smile. I went into the back room behind a wall, and on camera, I could see him staring in my direction. Same creepy smile the whole time. He eventually snuck out of the back room when no one was looking and snuck up behind me, totally silent. Same creepy smile, and grabbed my wrists, not a sound. Oh, and a boner. I yelled. Coworkers tackled and restrained him, and we packed him off to the psych ward. Creepiest dude ever. Don't do drugs made in a bathtub, kids. He kept looking at my feet and ankle and asked to rub my feet the first time I decided to hang out with him. Luckily, when he approached me, while he was cute, I was cautious and made our first hangout a group hangout, which now I am so glad about. He got creepier the second hangout, public again, and then when I decided a couple of hangouts were enough and I ended our contact, I later saw him in the news arrested for trying to break into a girl's house and trying to R her. Creepiest person I've ever met was a woman I knew when I was younger. I was 14 or 15, a freshman in high school, and heavily into the hardcore scene. It was that awkward age when you're drinking hard liquor for the first time in the woods behind the barn with the boys every weekend, and you look like a man, so you think you are one, but you're still totally a kid. I met a strange woman at a hardcore show. She was around 24 or 25, and she almost instantly developed a massive crush on me. I have no idea why. We had literally nothing in common other than liking hardcore shows. She wanted to be introduced to my parents. She talked to me every night on AIM for 6 hours. She'd find out which shows I was going to, and then show up there and spend the whole time trying to hug me or hang on my arm or wait for me outside the bathroom. I'd never received any kind of female attention, so I wasn't sure how to feel about it. She was more attractive than anyone we went to school with, so my friends thought I was a stud, and my parents thought it was a cute, silly thing that I had an older friend. I told a guidance counselor at school about it, and he gave me a high five. But the whole thing made me feel kind of nauseous, just like a gut feeling of there's something not right happening here. Anytime I had a crush on a girl, or a dude for that matter, she'd bother my friends until they'd tell her who it was, then throw a tantrum and yell about how other girls were whores, and she was the one listening to me and all my problems. And when was I going to wake up and see that true love was right in front of me the whole time? And when that didn't work, because it never worked, I thought she was scary and unstable. She'd cry and say nobody loved her until me, or another one of my friends would comfort her. This went on for years. She'd occasionally get boyfriends, but everyone she dated thought it was really weird that she thought sex was nasty, and that all her friends were teenagers. So she never had a partner for long. Eventually, when I was around 18 or 19, she lost interest. And from what I heard, she started dating a guy around my age with Down syndrome. I ran into her when I was in my early 20s because we were hanging out with some older friends and she showed up. And she called me a dark-hearted psychopath because I had the audacity to grow up. Haven't seen or heard from her since. Good effing riddance. Everything, really. His exclusively wanting to hang out with young girls who he had access to through the anime con scene, wouldn't respect any boundaries, would force physical contact whenever he wanted, would ask invasive questions and make semi-sexual comments about pretty much every girl he saw, and just generally do anything in his power to be overly familiar and inappropriate. And it was always wrapped up in a, "Ooh, I'm just a nice nerd boy who's non-threatening and emotional" persona that in some ways disguised how absolutely inappropriate his behavior was. I worked with this guy who claimed he had Asperger's. He was a known convicted kitty diddler and all-around weirdo. He'd tell you the same joke repeatedly throughout the day, have weird outbursts of swearing over tiny things, poor hygiene, a mega loud voice, et al. Any one of those things would be enough, but what really freaked me out about him was when he told a few of us this funny story about the emails and texts he'd send to online scammers. You know, those hot babes in your area types, and carry on weird conversations with them as a joke. One example was when he told one of his sexual fantasies was for his pet rats to gnaw their way through her vagina and come out her stomach, and another was him telling a different one that his last girlfriend went missing. They can't find her or her car at all. Not only did he tell it like it was a real knee slapper story, but it also sounded like a humble brag. I told HR and nothing happened. Yet I got in trouble for using emojis in a company chat. That's one of many reasons why I quit. I have no doubt that that dude has murdered at least one person. 25 female, was working out at a fairly busy gym with one other person in the gym at the time, as it was late at night. He made a point to only work out on the equipment directly behind me, and every time I would move to another, he would move to the machine behind. It happened so many times that I started to text my boyfriend to tell him I was getting kind of creeped out by a guy at the gym, and I was uncomfortable because I was alone in the building with him. There's an entire wall in this gym that's just a long mirror, so you can see the entire room through this giant thing. I look up at the mirror as I'm texting my boyfriend, and this man was standing behind me and reading my text over my shoulder from behind the machine. Instead of freaking out and making the situation more dangerous for myself, I stood up and got off the machine, put my phone in my pocket, and briskly walked to the front door without even turning around. I walked out and got in my car safely, but by this point, I was full of adrenaline and fear. Luckily, he didn't follow. I don't know why he would have done that or what his intentions were, but I noped the F out of there, reported it to my gym the next day, and was told they would investigate and handle it. Never saw him again, thank God. You did everything you could. This is why I have some concerns about those 24-hour gyms with very little to no staff. It's not cool. And standing behind you reading your text, he's a bad dude. Over 20 years ago, I worked for a homeopathic shop in a tourist town. One day, the owner and I were chatting at the cash register. It was a slow day, and we were discussing floor displays for the upcoming season. A small woman, maybe in her mid-50s, was browsing in the shop. Her movements were just off. She wasn't pacing or shaky, but she definitely had an elevated energy, like she was agitated or annoyed. The owner and I greeted her. She came straight towards us like she was pissed. She directed her anger at the owner, asking odd things like why there was no gift wrap service offered. Then she wanted to know why the jewelry was out and not in locked display cases. She was all over the map, no rhyme or reason to her questions. I thought she was eccentric or off her meds or something. The owner was tense and starting to be very nervous. I stepped into the conversation to redirect the woman and let the owner regroup. The woman, who had been to this moment acting like I wasn't even there, turned her gaze to me. My brothers and sisters in Christ, I swear to you, the woman's eyes changed color. She looked at me, and they were black. Not like dilated, but entirely black. I saw no iris color. To this day, I have no idea what that was about, but I will never forget it.